And over the course of time, people, including our now president, wasn't president at the time, have offered me sums of. It's about what I think, because it seems in tennis, unlike other sports.
John McEnroe erupted, and the tennis world acted like it never happened. He said it on live TNT television. He called the world's #1 player a liar. Not quietly, not carefully. He watched Sinner walk out of that press conference, calm, composed, denying everything. And McEnroe said his nose was growing, a little bit of Pinocchio there. A 7-time Grand Slam champion, accusing the sport's biggest name, on air. That is the buried truth behind Sinner's French Open collapse, and everyone deliberately ignored it. This week, Tony Nadal called what happened in Paris truly strange and incomprehensible. Muratoglu went public on Instagram, calling it a 100% heat stroke Sinner buried from his rivals on purpose. Rusetsky named a virus from Australia that may never have left his system. Sinner himself has gone completely silent, skipping every grass warm-up tournament, nothing until Wimbledon on June 29th. 4 points from victory, 18 consecutive points lost. A 56th ranked opponent who said after the match, "I got lucky." The man who beat him admitted he got lucky. Nobody asked why. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now, because what this sport spent a week burying is exactly what we're pulling out today. Let's go back to May 28th. Court Philippe Chatrier, noon. Paris had been sitting under a record heat wave for a full week before this match started. Temperatures on court hit 33 degrees Celsius, 91 degrees Fahrenheit. No breeze, no shade, just open clay baking under a white sky. The kind of conditions that don't just test athletes, they expose them. Standing on one side of that net was Juan Manuel Cerúndolo, ranked 56th in the world, a 32-1 underdog, a man who had never once reached the third round of a Grand Slam in his entire career. His job that Thursday afternoon was simple: show up, compete hard, and lose respectably against the most dominant player on the planet. On the other side was Jannik Sinner. 4 Grand Slam titles, a 30-match winning streak, 5 Masters 1000 titles already banked in 2026, every single one available before Paris. Monte Carlo, Indian Wells, Miami, Madrid, and Rome, all of them. He had beaten Carlos Alcaraz in the Italian Open final just weeks earlier. Alcaraz, the only man on tour who had genuinely troubled him in 2 years. The world #1 arrived at Roland Garros not just as the favorite. He arrived as the story. A career Grand Slam was one tournament away. No Alcaraz in the draw. No visible obstacle, just clay, time, and a chance at history that had been building for 3 years. For an hour and 20 minutes, everything went exactly to script. Sinner took the first set 6-3. Clinical, Cerúndolo barely touched the ball. The second set went 6-2, then the third set opened and Sinner moved to 5-1. One service game from the third round. He had dropped 9 games total across 2.5 sets. The match was over. Commentators were already pivoting to who he might face next. Then his body stopped. Not tactically, not mentally, physically stopped. He lost 15 consecutive points. He called for medical attention and left the court. When he returned, he had a handheld fan in one hand and ice bags draped around his neck like a boxer between rounds who already knows the outcome. He lost the third set 7-5 after leading 5-1, then the fourth 6-1, then the fifth 6-1. The final 18 of 20 games went to Cerúndolo. The scoreline read 3-6, 2-6, 7-5, 6-1, 6-1. The earliest exit by the top men's seed at Roland Garros since Andre Agassi in the year 2000. Cerúndolo walked to the net. He shook hands, he spoke to the press, and then he said something that deserved far more attention than it got. What am I going to say, right? I got lucky today. Obviously, I gave it my all and tried to play my best tennis, but I'm not going to puff myself up and say just anything, because the truth is I got lucky. Read that carefully. The man who produced the biggest upset at Roland Garros in 25 years told the world at his own moment of triumph that he got lucky. Not false modesty, not deflection. A direct, honest admission from the only person in that stadium with absolutely no reason to misrepresent what just happened. That statement got buried within 24 hours. The tennis media cycle moved instantly to the Sinner press conference, the medical timeout, the heat rule technicalities. And Cherundolo's honesty disappeared inside the noise. So what actually happened at that press conference? Sinner sat down and said, "I woke up this morning, I didn't feel very well. I struggled and started to feel very dizzy, very low on energy. I tried to serve it out but didn't have a lot of energy. It was warm, but it was okay to play in. Really, it was nothing against the heat, nothing against the weather, it was just me today." Then he said this, "I don't remember the last time I felt this weak." Stop at that sentence. It confirms that something was genuinely, seriously wrong with his body. Not a mental wobble, not a tactical lapse, not a rough game on an off day. Something physical, something real. And at the exact same moment, it refuses to name what that something was. He deflected the heat. He blamed nothing specific. He gave the press a feeling, without a fact. That was a calculated decision, not an emotional one. Patrick Mouratoglou, the coach who built Serena Williams into the most dominant player of her generation, made that absolutely clear. He posted on Instagram within hours of the match. His words were direct. "For me, it's 100% a heat stroke. The real message I get from his press conference is the fact that he doesn't want his opponents to know that he has a weakness there. He actually has one big weakness, which is his resistance to extreme heat and humidity. When you have both, it's even worse." What makes Mouratoglou's analysis particularly credible is that he had flagged this vulnerability before the match. During the Paris heatwave, he had warned publicly that heat combined with clay and 5 sets represented what he described as the most difficult combo of the year, specifically for Sinner. He pointed to Casper Ruud as a warning sign. Ruud had nearly collapsed in almost identical circumstances just days before Sinner's match, leading comfortably, then losing 11 consecutive games before his opponent broke down first. Mouratoglou saw the structure of what was coming, he named it. And then Sinner walked onto court in 91-degree noon heat, and it played out in front of 15,000 people exactly as described. But here is where this goes deeper, much deeper. Greg Rusedski went on his podcast after the match and said something the mainstream tennis media absorbed briefly and then dropped entirely. It's basically heat exhaustion, or maybe he had something with the virus he had in Australia. These viruses can linger. When you are winning matches as easily as he has been, you can cruise through matches. But the heat got him in Paris. That's the only explanation that makes sense to me. Rusedski is a former British number 1, a man who played professional tennis at the highest level for over a decade. When he raises a medical concern about a colleague's physical condition, it carries real weight, and the concern he raised has documented, verifiable support across Sinner's recent history, the part that the heat weakness narrative conveniently skips over. At the 2026 Australian Open, earlier this same year, Sinner battled a virus through the entire tournament. He cramped severely during at least one match. The roof at Rod Laver Arena was closed and air conditioning was activated specifically to manage conditions for him. He won the title, but his body was sending clear distress signals throughout. Before that, at the 2025 Shanghai Masters, Sinner retired mid-match due to full-body cramping. Not a strategic withdrawal, a full physical retirement. Then at the 2026 Rome Masters, just weeks before Paris, he cramped again during his semi-final against Daniil Medvedev. 3 events. 3 separate cramping or illness incidents, all within the 8 months leading directly into Roland Garros. Now consider what Sinner said at the Paris press conference again. He said he didn't sleep well the night before. He said he was struggling a bit when he woke up that morning. That is not how a player describes heat. Heat arrives on court. Heat builds during a match. What Sinner described, waking up unwell, struggling before the first ball was struck, is how a player describes systemic illness. Something already undermining him before he walked out of his hotel room. Not one journalist in that press room asked the follow-up question. Nobody pressed him on what not feeling well in the morning actually referred to. The narrative had already hardened. Heat collapse, kryptonite, known weakness in extreme conditions, and it was too clean and too convenient to complicate. With a harder medical line of questioning. Which brings us directly to the scheduling decision Roland Garros has never given a clean answer on. Sinner played his first-round match against Clément Tabour in the night session, after 8 p.m. local time, well past the worst heat of the day. 2 days later, for his second-round match against Cerundolo, the tournament placed him in the noon slot on court Philippe Chatrier. The hottest start time during the hottest week Paris had seen at Roland Garros in years. The decision split opinion immediately. Some argued Roland Garros was trying to protect Sinner by scheduling him before the afternoon heat peaked. Others, including Rusetsky, said the organization made a straightforward error, placing the world's best player on court at maximum heat exposure during a record heatwave. Mats Wilander, one of the most respected analytical voices in the sport, addressed the scheduling inequality specifically on air. The fact that there hasn't been a men's match first in 3 years, what is that about? That doesn't make sense at all. Where's the equality in that? That question matters because it connects directly to what Roland Garros subsequently confirmed about its own heat protocol. Under the WBGT index system, a heat break in men's matches is only permitted between the third and fourth sets, not before and not during the third set. Sinner's collapse was unfolding inside the third set. By the tournament's own rules, he had no formal heat protection available at precisely the moment his body needed it most. Not a break, not a pause, nothing. Jim Courier, a 2-time French Open champion now working as a TNT analyst, chose that moment to go public with criticism of Sinner's medical timeout. His argument, cramping is not classified as an injury under the rules, meaning a medical timeout called for cramping could be considered a violation of the regulations. The argument carries technical weight, but hold that argument next to the image on the court at the time. A player visibly falling apart in 91-degree heat, barely moving, requesting medical attention. And the sport's response, at least in part, was to question whether the rules permitted him to receive it. The debate over the timeout's legality consumed significant broadcast time and column inches. The question of why professional tennis has no enforceable heat protection for men in the first 3 sets of a Grand Slam match received a fraction of that attention. That is not an accident, that is a culture selecting the argument it can manage over the one it cannot. McEnroe was right that heat is Sinner's kryptonite. He said it clearly, on air, without hesitation. He was also right that Sinner made a costly tactical error in the 4th set, expending physical effort on a set he should have conceded to conserve what little remained for the 5th. McEnroe said on TNT, "I would have thrown the 4th. I think a lot of people would probably agree at this point to try and conserve." By the 5th set, it was already irreversible. McEnroe saw that clearly. That part of his eruption was accurate. What McEnroe didn't do, what no one did loudly enough, was connect the individual threads into the full picture. The virus that may still have been active in Sinner's system. The scheduling decision that placed him at peak heat exposure when his body was already compromised. The heat rules that offered zero formal protection when the collapse was actively happening. The press conference where he strategically concealed the real cause from future opponents. The media environment that grabbed the most photogenic narrative available and stopped asking harder questions. Tony Nadal, the man who coached Rafael Nadal to 14 Roland Garros titles, looked at everything and called it truly strange and incomprehensible. That is not a throwaway comment from a peripheral figure. That is one of the sharpest tactical minds tennis has ever produced, saying openly that what happened on court Philippe Chatrier on May 28th does not yet have a sufficient explanation. He told the press that if he were Sinner's coach, he would give him complete rest before addressing what actually went wrong, because something needs to be understood, not just recovered from. Sinner has since confirmed he will skip every grass court warm-up event and return only at Wimbledon, which starts June 29th. No Halle, no Queen's Club, just silence and preparation. For a reigning Wimbledon champion, that is not routine recovery management. That is a player and a team who know something is unresolved and are addressing it away from scrutiny. The sport gave this story roughly 3 days of serious attention before moving on. Djokovic lost to 19-year-old João Fonseca. The draw cracked wide open. The conversation shifted to generational change and first-time Grand Slam winners. Sinner's collapse became a footnote inside a larger narrative, rather than a question demanding a proper answer. The question still stands. What was actually wrong with Jannik Sinner before he walked onto that court? A heat stroke, as Muratoglu insists? A lingering virus from Melbourne, as Rusedski raised? Accumulated physical exhaustion from the most sustained winning run the men's tour has produced in years? The honest answer is that nobody outside Sinner's inner circle knows, and Sinner's inner circle is not saying. The buried truth behind his French Open collapse is not that he lost. It is that the conditions producing that loss were visible and documented long before May 28th. Credible voices named them, evidence existed, and everyone with a platform chose the simpler story over the complete one. McEnroe erupted, but his eruption only reached the surface. The sport owes this story a real answer. And until it gets won, Wimbledon carries a question that no winning streak can silence. If this gave you something the mainstream tennis coverage didn't, a complete picture instead of a convenient one, hit that like button right now and share this with every tennis fan you know. Subscribe if you haven't already. This channel exists for exactly this kind of story, the ones everyone else deliberately leaves buried. We are not done with this one yet.